Our/malicious compliance neighbor called out my vegan meat, so I sabotaged his barbecue. Oh my god, what is that smell? Rick's voice boomed across my backyard like a foghorn, cutting through the pleasant chatter of my guests. I watched in horror as my carefully planned vegan barbecue, my first real attempt at hosting since moving to Maple Street 6 months ago, ground to an uncomfortable halt. "Sarah's serving fake meat," he announced to anyone within a 3-block radius, waving his beer bottle toward my grill like he was conducting an orchestra of judgment. Can you believe this hippie nonsense? I felt my cheeks burn as 20 pairs of eyes suddenly focused on my Beyond Burgers and jackfruit pulled pork. My coworker Jessica, who'd been raving about the plant-based brats just seconds before, quietly set hers down on her plate. The Hendersons from next door exchanged those looks, you know the ones, like they'd just realized they'd been fed dog food. "It's actually quite delicious," I managed, forcing my voice to stay steady. "And better for the environment." "Better for the environment?" Rick let out this obnoxious bark of laughter that made my skin crawl. "Sweetheart, humans have been eating real meat for thousands of years. You can't improve on perfection with whatever processed garbage that is." He gestured dismissively at my grill, where I'd spent hours perfecting the char on my plant-based creations. My stomach twisted as I watched my guest's enthusiasm evaporate like steam from the barbecue. "These aren't processed," I started. "Look, I get it," Rick interrupted, stepping closer to my deck uninvited, his gut straining against his Grill Master t-shirt. "You're trying to save the whales or whatever, but don't torture your friends with this fake food nonsense. Tell you what, I'm having a real barbecue next weekend for the annual neighborhood competition. Come on over and I'll show you what actual meat tastes like." Might convert you back to the carnivore side. The way he said carnivore with such smug pride made my teeth clench. This wasn't just about food preferences, this was about respect. I'd spent 3 weeks planning this barbecue, researching recipes, perfecting marinades, and shopping at 4 different stores to find the best plant-based alternatives. This party meant everything to me. After my divorce last year, after starting over in a new city, after making the ethical choice to go vegan despite constant pushback from family, this barbecue was supposed to prove I could build community around my values. Instead, Rick had turned it into a public humiliation. "Thanks for the invitation," I said through gritted teeth, "but I'm perfectly happy with my choices." "Suit yourself," he shrugged, then raised his voice again. "But folks, if you want real food next Saturday, I'll be firing up the smoker at noon. Brisket, ribs, pulled pork, the works. None of this cardboard-flavored health food." A few of my guests actually chuckled. Jessica avoided my eyes entirely. As Rick finally stumbled back to his own yard, still muttering loud enough for everyone to hear about tofu toxins and soy boys, I stood frozen by my grill, spatula in hand, watching my first real attempt at community building crumble like overcooked tempeh. The party limped along for another hour, but the damage was done. Rick had poisoned the well, turning my celebration into a joke. As I cleaned up later that evening, scraping barely touched plant-based burgers into my compost bin, one thought crystallized in my mind. If Rick wanted to play games, I'd show him exactly what this environmental scientist was capable of. The next morning, I stood in my kitchen nursing my 3rd cup of coffee and staring out at the aftermath. Red Solo cups littered my deck like evidence of a crime scene, and the smell of my expensive plant-based sausages still lingered in the air, a $200 reminder of my spectacular failure. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, "Thanks for last night. Sorry, I had to leave early." Right. Had to leave early after Rick's performance. Just like the Hendersons, who suddenly remembered they had early morning plans. Half my guests had evaporated within 20 minutes of Rick's little comedy show. I was contemplating whether it was too early for wine when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of Rick's leaf blower firing up at 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Because of course he was that neighbor. Grabbing my coffee, I stepped onto my deck to assess the damage from last night and immediately froze. Rick wasn't blowing leaves. He was standing in his driveway in nothing but pajama pants and flip-flops, using the leaf blower to clean barbecue grease off his concrete. And all that grease? It was flowing in a dark, chunky river straight toward the storm drain at the end of our shared driveway. I watched in disbelief as chunks of what looked like meat scraps and congealed fat swirled into the city drainage system. Rick caught sight of me and actually waved, like he was performing some perfectly normal Sunday morning ritual instead of committing what I was pretty sure were multiple environmental violations. "Morning, Sarah," he called over the roar of the blower. "Hope we didn't wake you. Just cleaning up from last night's real meat fest." My environmental science degree kicked into overdrive. Storm drains led directly to local waterways. The grease would coat everything it touched, disrupting oxygen levels and killing aquatic life. The meat scraps would decompose, creating bacterial blooms and potentially E. coli contamination. This wasn't just gross, it was illegal on multiple levels. "Rick," I called out, trying to keep my voice neighborly despite my mounting horror. "You might want to scoop that up instead of washing it down the drain." He cupped his ear theatrically. "What's that?" "Can't hear you over the sound of progress." The leaf blower roared louder as he directed another stream of grease water toward the storm drain. A chunk of what looked suspiciously like a pork chop bone tumbled along with the current. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Then I stopped myself. Was I really going to be that neighbor? The one who called the city on people for every little violation? But as I watched Rick finish his cleaning and give me a satisfied thumbs up before heading inside, I realized this wasn't little. This was exactly the kind of environmental destruction that drove me to veganism in the first place. And Rick was doing it with such casual disregard, such obvious pride in his wastefulness. My phone rang, startling me out of my moral debate. Mom's face smiled up from the screen. "Hi, honey. How was your barbecue? Did your neighbors love your cooking?" I stared at the greasy residue still visible on the concrete, thinking about Rick's smug face, about my guest's uncomfortable exodus, about Jessica's obvious lie. "It was educational," I said finally. "That's wonderful. I'm so proud of you for putting yourself out there. Building community is so important, especially after everything you've been through." After everything I'd been through. The divorce that left me questioning my worth. The move to a new city where I knew nobody. The decision to go vegan despite constant ridicule. The months of loneliness while I tried to rebuild my life around my values. Rick had taken all of that progress and turned it into a punchline. Mom, I have to go, I said, watching a neighbor walk by Rick's driveway and wrinkle his nose at the lingering smell. I have some research to do. After Mom hung up, I spent the next hour doing what any good environmental scientist would do, research. City Ordinance 47.3b prohibited the discharge of grease and food waste into storm drainage systems, with fines ranging from $500 to $2,000 for first offenses. Ordinance 23.1a covered illegal dumping of organic matter, and there were at least 3 EPA regulations Rick had violated in his 5-minute cleaning session. I was deep into municipal code violations when my doorbell rang. Sarah. My heart sank as I opened the door to find Rick standing on my porch, still in those ridiculous pajama pants but now sporting a meat is murder of hunger t-shirt that made me want to slam the door in his face. What can I do for you, Rick? Listen, I felt bad about last night, he said, though his expression suggested he felt anything but bad. I know you put effort into that food situation. So I wanted to personally invite you to next Saturday's cookout. Maybe watching a real pitmaster in action will inspire you. The audacity was breathtaking. That's very thoughtful of you. Plus, I could use an environmental expert's opinion on my new smoker setup. Just got this massive offset smoker delivered yesterday, thing's a beast. Probably not great for your carbon footprint concerns, but hey, priorities, right? He gestured toward his backyard, where I could now see an enormous black metal contraption that looked like it could smoke enough meat for a small army. The thing was huge, easily 8 feet long and definitely not designed for suburban backyards. Wow, I managed. That's substantial. Right? Cost me $3,000, but it's worth it for the neighborhood competition. I've won 4 years running, and this baby's going to seal my 5th championship. The Hendersons think their gas grill can compete, amateur hour. This is serious barbecue equipment. 5 championships. Of course. Rick wasn't just the neighborhood jerk, he was the neighborhood barbecue king, which explained why my guests had been so quick to abandon ship last night. Nobody wanted to alienate the reigning champion. I'm smoking a whole hog this year, he continued. 40-pound beast from my buddy's farm. None of that grocery store garbage. This pig lived its best life before becoming my trophy. The irony of Rick lecturing me about an animal's quality of life wasn't lost on me, but I kept my mouth shut. Anyway, he said, competition starts at noon, judging at 4. Whole neighborhood will be there, plus some folks from the barbecue society. Big crowd, probably 30 or 40 people. You should come watch a master at work. 30 or 40 people. Perfect. I'll definitely consider it, I said. Great. Oh, and Sarah? His tone shifted, becoming almost mockingly sincere. Don't take last night personally. People around here just have traditional tastes, you know? Maybe stick to salads at the next gathering. Play to your strengths. After he left, I stood in my doorway watching him examine his new smoker like a general inspecting troops. The thing was positioned right next to the storm drain, the same drain he'd been washing grease into that morning. In fact, his entire cooking setup seemed designed for easy cleanup via environmental violation. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found what I was looking for, David Chen, my former colleague at the EPA's regional office. We'd worked together on watershed protection cases for 3 years before I moved. David? It's Sarah Martinez. I need to ask you about municipal enforcement procedures. By the time I hung up 20 minutes later, I had a clear understanding of exactly how environmental violations were reported, investigated, and penalized. More importantly, I knew the city's enforcement schedule, and how to ensure a compliance officer would be available for immediate response on weekends. Rick wanted to show off his barbecue mastery in front of the whole neighborhood? Perfect. I'd make sure he had an audience for everything. Monday morning brought the perfect opportunity I'd been waiting for. I was sipping my coffee on the deck, ostensibly reading a book about sustainable gardening, when Rick emerged for his weekly trash ritual. But this wasn't ordinary garbage collection. Rick wheeled out not 1, but 3 overflowing bins, each one leaking suspicious dark liquid onto his driveway. As he struggled with the weight, seriously, what was in those things? One of the bags split open, spilling what looked like a week's worth of meat scraps, grease-soaked paper towels, and congealed fat across the concrete. Son of a, Rick's curse echoed across the quiet suburban morning. I watched over my book as he glanced around nervously, probably hoping none of the neighbors were witnessing his disaster. When his eyes met mine, I gave a friendly wave. He grimaced and waved back, then did exactly what I predicted. Out came the leaf blower again. This time I was ready. My phone was already recording as Rick systematically blasted pounds of rotting meat scraps and grease straight toward the storm drain. A chunk of what might have been a ribeye bone tumbled past like grotesque driftwood. The smell was nauseating even from my deck 30 feet away. But here's where it got interesting. Mrs. Patterson from 3 houses down chose that exact moment for her morning power walk, her little terrier Princess in tow. Princess took one whiff of Rick's cleanup operation and started barking frantically, pulling toward the mess. Oh my goodness! Mrs. Patterson exclaimed, covering her nose with her sleeve. Rick, what on earth are you doing? Just a little spill, Mrs. P. Rick called back, not bothering to turn off the blower. Nothing to worry about. But Princess had other ideas. The little dog broke free from Mrs. Patterson's grip and made a beeline for the storm drain, where she started rolling in the accumulated grease and meat scraps like she'd found doggy paradise. Princess, no. Mrs. Patterson shrieked, chasing after her now filthy pet. Get away from that. What I this mess. I couldn't have scripted this better. Mrs. Patterson was president of the Maple Street Neighborhood Association, notorious for her attention to detail and strict adherence to community standards. She was also, I'd learned from Jessica, the one who organized the barbecue competition judging committee. Rick finally shut off the leaf blower, his face cycling through several shades of red. It's just some leftover barbecue prep, Mrs. P. Really, it's fine. This is going into the storm system. Mrs. Patterson interrupted, now holding a disgusted, grease-covered Princess at arm's length. Rick, this is completely inappropriate. Do you have any idea where this water goes? Look, I'll clean it up better next time. There shouldn't be a next time. This is... She paused, scanning the evidence scattered across his driveway and flowing toward the drain. This is potentially illegal dumping. My heart raced. Mrs. Patterson was making my case for me, and I hadn't even started my campaign yet. Now, Mrs. P, let's not get all dramatic here, Rick said, his voice taking on that condescending tone I'd grown to hate. It's just a little grease. Rain'll wash it away anyway. Wrong thing to say. Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted from disgusted to furious. Rain will wash it into Meadowbrook Creek, Rick. Where my grandchildren play. Where the wildlife refuge gets its water supply. She struggled to keep hold of the squirming, stinky princess. I'm calling the city about this. Whoa, whoa. Rick's hands went up in surrender. No need for all that official business. Tell you what, why don't you bring those grandkids to my barbecue competition Saturday? I'll throw some hot dogs on for them. We're all neighbors here, right? I watched Mrs. Patterson's face carefully. Would she be bought off by Rick's charm offensive? We'll see about Saturday, she said coldly. Right now I need to get Princess cleaned up. But Rick? This conversation isn't over. As Mrs. Patterson marched away with her polluted pet, Rick stood amid his environmental crime scene looking genuinely worried for the first time since I'd known him. Perfect. Let him sweat a little. I was already mentally composing my email to David Chin. The competition was 5 days away, and I now had witnesses, video evidence, and a very angry neighborhood association president. Rick had just made this almost too easy. That evening, I was uploading my video evidence to a secure folder when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Jessica standing on my porch with what looked like a casserole dish. Hey, Sarah. I brought you some leftover lasagna from dinner. Thought you might want some real food after. She trailed off awkwardly. After my vegan disaster, she meant. I opened the door anyway. That's sweet of you, Jess, but you know I don't eat. Oh right. God, I'm sorry. I keep forgetting about the whole vegan thing. She set the dish down on my porch table. Actually, can I come in? I wanted to talk to you about something. My stomach dropped. Had she seen me recording Rick this morning? Sure, come in. Jessica settled onto my couch, fidgeting with her purse strap. So, I heard Mrs. Patterson had some kind of confrontation with Rick today. Something about illegal dumping? Word traveled fast on Maple Street. I wouldn't know. I was just reading on my deck. Right. Jessica's tone suggested she didn't quite buy that. Look, Sarah, I like you. You're smart, you're passionate about your causes, and honestly? Rick was a total ass at your barbecue. But. Here it comes. But Rick's kind of a big deal around here. He organizes the 4th of July block party, he plows everyone's driveways in winter, and his barbecue competition raises money for the Children's Hospital every year. People depend on him. I blinked. He raises money for charity? Last year alone, he brought in $8,000. The neighborhood association matches whatever the competition raises, so it ends up being a pretty substantial donation. Jessica leaned forward. Mrs. Patterson mentioned she might call the city about Rick's cleanup methods. And I'm worried that if there's some big investigation right before the competition, the fundraiser gets cancelled, I finished, my chest tightening. Exactly. Look, I'm not saying Rick was right to humiliate you. But maybe there's a way to handle this that doesn't hurt the kids at the hospital? After Jessica left, I sat in my kitchen staring at her untouched lasagna and feeling like the world's biggest monster. Children's Hospital. $8,000. Of course Rick's competition wasn't just about his ego, it was funding pediatric care. I pulled up the video on my phone, watching Rick blast grease into the storm drain. Environmental protection was important too, wasn't it? The watershed, the wildlife, the long-term health of the ecosystem. These things mattered. But so did sick kids. My phone rang. David Chin. Sarah, I looked into those ordinances you asked about. If someone's really dumping grease and organic waste into storm systems, that's serious business. EPA's been cracking down hard on urban watershed contamination. What would happen if someone got caught? First offense? Minimum 500 in fines, but probably closer to $2,000 given the scope you described. Plus mandatory environmental remediation, they'd have to pay for professional drain cleaning and water testing. Could easily run $4,000 or $5,000 total. $7,000. Almost as much as Rick's fundraiser. Of course, David continued, if it happened during some kind of public event, the penalties would be much steeper. Public health risk, increased environmental impact, that sort of thing. City takes a very dim view of people who pollute during community gatherings. What do you mean steeper? 10,000 minimum. Possibly criminal charges if it's flagrant enough. David paused. Sarah, is everything okay? You sound stressed. $10,000. The fundraiser money, plus $2,000 more that Rick probably didn't have. I'm fine, I lied. Just, researching for a friend. After hanging up, I walked out to my deck and stared at Rick's house. His massive smoker sat like a monument to excess next to the storm drain. Through his kitchen window, I could see him seasoning what looked like an enormous piece of meat, probably prep for Saturday's competition. The same competition that funded medical care for children. I thought about my humiliation at the barbecue, about Rick's smug face, about Jessica quietly setting down her plant-based brat. About months of loneliness and judgment and starting over in a world that seemed determined to punish me for trying to live ethically. Then I thought about kids in hospital beds whose treatment might depend on Rick's barbecue trophy. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard you're the environmental expert. Any advice for keeping my competition set up clean? Rick. I stared at the message. Was this an olive branch? An apology? Or was Rick testing me, trying to figure out if I was the one causing trouble? I typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on, happy to help a neighbor. Within seconds, my phone rang. Rick's name on the caller ID made my hands shake. Sarah. Great to hear from you. Listen, I know we got off on the wrong foot, but I'm hoping we can work together here. Work together. Right. What did you have in mind, Rick? What I have in mind, Rick continued, his voice taking on that fake friendly tone I'd grown to despise, is maybe you could take a look at my setup before Saturday. Make sure everything's environmentally sound, you know? Mrs. Patterson got me thinking about my impact on the community. I almost laughed out loud. Rick was worried about his impact now? After years of literally washing his problems down the drain? That's very thoughtful of you, Rick. Plus, I figured you might want to see how a real barbecue operation works. Educational opportunity and all that. When are you free? The audacity was staggering, but it was also perfect. If Rick wanted to show me his setup, I'd get a front row seat to document every violation before Saturday's big event. Tomorrow evening works for me. Great. Oh, and Sarah? I appreciate you being so understanding about the whole Mrs. Patterson situation. I know she can be a little dramatic about these things. After he hung up, I sat staring at my phone. Rick actually thought he could charm his way out of this. That a friendly conversation and a guided tour would somehow make me forget about his environmental crimes and public humiliation of my barbecue. My laptop chimed with an email notification. A message from the Maple Street Neighborhood Association, a group newsletter I'd apparently been added to without my knowledge. Neighbors, don't forget about Saturday's annual barbecue competition and charity fundraiser. Last year we raised $8,000 for Mercy Children's Hospital, and this year we're hoping to break $10,000. Special thanks to our defending champion Rick Morrison for organizing another fantastic event. Judging begins at 4 p.m., with awards ceremony at 5 p.m. All proceeds benefit the Pediatric Wing's new equipment fund. See you there. Eleanor Patterson, President. $10,000. They wanted to raise $10,000, exactly what Rick would owe in fines if he got caught polluting during a public event. The cosmic irony was almost beautiful. I was still processing this when another email arrived, this one from Jessica. Sarah, forgot to mention, Rick asked me to help coordinate the judges for Saturday. Would you be interested in being on the panel? Might be a good way to show the neighborhood your foodie expertise in a different context. Let me know. Judge Rick's Barbecue. The same Rick who'd mocked my food in front of everyone, who'd called it disgusting hippie food and suggested I stick to salads. Now he wanted me to evaluate his precious competition entry. I started typing, thanks for thinking of me, but I don't think that's appropriate given. Then I stopped. Being a judge meant I'd be right there when the city inspector arrived. I'd have a legitimate reason to be examining everyone's cooking setup, asking questions, taking notes. Rick couldn't complain about my presence if I was officially part of the event. I deleted my response and typed, I'd be honored to help judge. Thanks for including me. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Mrs. Patterson. Sarah, dear, I hope you don't mind me calling. Jessica mentioned you'd agreed to judge Saturday's competition. Yes, I'm looking forward to it. Wonderful. I wanted to discuss the judging criteria with you, since this is your first time. We evaluate based on taste, presentation, and technique. But Sarah. Her voice dropped conspiratorially. I also wanted to mention that I've been thinking about our conversation regarding Rick's cleanup methods. My heart rate spiked. Oh? I've decided to table any official complaints until after Saturday. The fundraiser is too important to risk disrupting. But I want you to know that I'll be watching very carefully during the competition. If I see any more of that disgusting behavior, especially with all those families present. That seems very reasonable, Mrs. Patterson. I'm glad you agree. Between you and me, I think having someone with your environmental expertise there as a judge will keep everyone on their best behavior. Sometimes people need gentle oversight to do the right thing. Gentle oversight. If only she knew what I was really planning. After Mrs. Patterson hung up, I walked out to my deck and looked across at Rick's backyard. His massive smoker dominated the space like a metal cathedral, positioned perfectly for easy grease disposal into the storm drain. Tomorrow I'd get to see his operation up close. Saturday I'd watch him compete for his 5th championship while 30 families cheered him on. And somewhere between those two moments, I'd have to decide just how far I was willing to go for revenge. My phone buzzed with one final message of the evening, from Rick, looking forward to tomorrow. Fair warning, I might convert you back to the carnivore side yet. Winking face. I stared at that winking emoji until my screen went dark, then typed back, we'll see about that. The next evening, I stood at Rick's back gate clutching a small notebook and trying to look like an eager environmental consultant rather than someone plotting neighborhood warfare. Rick bounded over like an overeager golden retriever, wearing yet another offensive t-shirt, this one reading Vegetarians, my food eat your food. Sarah. Perfect timing. I just finished seasoning the pork shoulder for Saturday's practice run. He gestured proudly toward his smoker, where aromatic clouds billowed into the evening air. Come on, let me show you this beauty. The setup was even more elaborate than I'd expected. Rick had essentially transformed his backyard into a commercial barbecue operation, complete with multiple prep tables, an industrial-sized sink that drained directly toward the storm system, and enough propane tanks to fuel a small restaurant. The massive smoker sat like a black metal beast, belching smoke that probably violated 3 different air quality ordinances. This here's my baby, Rick said, patting the smoker's side. Offset firebox, dual cooking chambers, temperature controls that'll hold steady for 16 hours. Cost me more than some people's cars, but when you're serious about barbecue. It's certainly impressive, I managed, scribbling notes about the proximity to the storm drain. How do you handle cleanup after big cooking sessions? Oh, that's the best part. Rick's enthusiasm was nauseating. See this prep area? Everything slopes toward that drain connection I installed. Makes washing down super efficient, just hose everything off and let gravity do the work. My pen froze mid-note. You installed a drain connection? Genius, right? My buddy Tony's a contractor, he hooked me up with a direct line to the storm system. No more hauling buckets of grease water around. Everything just flows away clean as a whistle. I stared at the custom drainage setup Rick was describing with obvious pride. This wasn't accidental contamination, it was deliberate, engineered environmental violation on an industrial scale. Rick, I said carefully, you know storm drains lead directly to Sarah. There you are. We both turned to see Jessica approaching with a man I didn't recognize, tall, bearded, wearing a pitmaster baseball cap. Sarah, meet Tony Castellanos. Tony, this is Sarah, our newest judge for Saturday. Tony extended a grease-stained hand that I reluctantly shook. Rick's told me all about you. The environmental scientist, right? Pretty cool that you're getting into barbecue. Tony's my barbecue mentor, Rick explained. He's won regionals 3 times. Flying in from Kansas City just to help me prep for Saturday. Actually, Tony said, glancing around Rick's setup, we need to talk about your drainage situation here, buddy. The competition rules changed this year. They're real strict about waste disposal now. Something about watershed protection. My heart nearly stopped. Changed how? Tony pulled out his phone and scrolled through what looked like an official document. Yeah, see here? All competitors must demonstrate environmentally responsible waste disposal practices. Grease and organic matter must be contained and disposed of through proper waste management systems only. Violation results in immediate disqualification and potential legal action. Rick's face went pale. Legal action? For what? Dumping food waste into storm systems is a federal EPA violation, man. They're cracking down hard after some big contamination case in Ohio last year. Competition organizers don't want any liability. Jessica looked confused. But Rick, you don't dump anything into storm drains, right? The silence stretched uncomfortably as Rick glanced between his custom drainage system and Tony's increasingly concerned expression. I mean, it's just rinse water mostly, Rick said weakly. Nothing major. Tony whistled low. Buddy, if the inspectors see this setup on Saturday, you're not just disqualified, you're probably looking at serious fines. They've got enforcement officers checking every competition site now. As Tony continued explaining the new regulations, I felt my carefully planned revenge slipping away. If Rick got disqualified before I could expose him publicly, where was the justice in that? Where was the humiliation to match what he'd done to me? Worse, if the competition got shut down entirely, those kids at the hospital would suffer for my vendetta. How much would it cost to fix this? Rick asked desperately. Tony examined the drainage system more closely. Complete remediation? You're looking at maybe 15,000-20,000. And that's if you can find someone to do emergency work before Saturday. Rick's barbecue empire was crumbling, but not the way I'd planned. This felt wrong, too easy, too impersonal. I wanted him to face consequences for his actions, yes, but I wanted him to know exactly why it was happening. Actually, I heard myself saying, there might be another solution. All 3 of them turned to stare at me like I'd just offered to perform surgery with a butter knife. What kind of solution? Rick asked, his voice tight with desperation. My mind raced. I hadn't planned for this, for Tony's revelation about new enforcement, for the possibility that Rick might get shut down before I could execute my carefully orchestrated public humiliation. But maybe this was better. Maybe this was the perfect opportunity to watch him squirm. Temporary containment, I said, trying to sound professional. If you can't fix the drainage by Saturday, you could set up a capture system. Tarps, collection bins, proper disposal containers. It's not permanent, but it would satisfy the inspectors. Tony nodded slowly. That could actually work. Messy as hell, but legal. You'd really help me figure that out? Rick's gratitude was so genuine it made my stomach turn. After I was such a jerk about your barbecue? This was it, my moment to be the bigger person, to extend an olive branch, to show Rick that kindness could triumph over his casual cruelty. The words were right there, of course, Rick. We're neighbors. Instead, I smiled and said, I'd be happy to help design a containment system. But it'll need to be absolutely foolproof. One spill during the competition and you're finished. Whatever it takes, Rick said immediately. I can't lose this competition. 5 years running, Sarah. This means everything to me. Everything to him. Just like my barbecue had meant everything to me before he destroyed it. We'll need to test it beforehand, I continued, pulling out my phone to take notes. Maybe Thursday night? Run through your entire prep process, see where the weak points are. Thursday's perfect. God, Sarah, you're a lifesaver. Jessica beamed at me like I'd just negotiated world peace. This is so great. See? I knew you two would figure out how to work together. As Tony and Rick started discussing logistics, I stepped back and pretended to examine the smoker setup while my actual plan crystallized. Rick wanted my help? Fine. I'd help him design the perfect containment system, one that would work flawlessly during Thursday's test run and fail spectacularly during Saturday's competition. In front of 30 families. In front of the judges. In front of Mrs. Patterson and her neighborhood association. In front of the enforcement officers Tony had mentioned. Sarah? Rick's voice cut through my planning. You look like you're thinking hard over there. Just calculating volumes, I lied smoothly. Grease production, runoff rates, container capacity. We need to get the math exactly right. See, this is why I need an expert, Rick said to Tony. Sarah's got the scientific background to make this bulletproof. Bulletproof. If only he knew. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hi Sarah, this is Mrs. Patterson. Rick mentioned you're helping with his environmental compliance for Saturday. As association president, I just want to say how wonderful it is to see neighbors supporting each other. The Children's Hospital will be so grateful for your contribution to keeping this fundraiser running smoothly. The Children's Hospital. There it was again, the guilt that kept creeping into my perfectly justified revenge plot. I stared at the message until the words blurred. Sarah? Jessica touched my arm gently. You okay? You look a little pale. Just tired, I said, forcing another smile. It's been a long day. But it wasn't tiredness weighing on me as I walked home 20 minutes later with pages of notes about Rick's operation, measurements of his drainage system, and a clear timeline for his destruction. It was the growing realization that my plan was no longer just about punishing Rick. It was about choosing exactly how much collateral damage I was willing to accept for the satisfaction of watching him fall. Thursday night arrived with a kind of crisp autumn air that should have made me feel peaceful. Instead, I stood in my kitchen at 6 p.m., staring at the detailed sabotage plan I'd sketched out over the past 2 days, my hands trembling slightly as I held my coffee mug. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Rick's containment system would rely on a series of collection tarps directing grease runoff into large bins positioned around his cooking area. All I had to do was weaken the support brackets on 2 key tarps, nothing dramatic, just enough to ensure they'd collapse under the weight of Saturday's massive pig roast. The grease would flow directly into the storm drain, right in front of 40 witnesses and at least one enforcement officer. My phone buzzed. Sarah. Ready for the test run? Tony brought beer. Beer mug. I grabbed my toolkit and headed over, trying to ignore the way my stomach clenched with each step. Rick's backyard was blazing with industrial work lights, making his prep area look like a movie set. Tony was already manning the smoker while Rick arranged collection bins with the focus of a surgeon. Sarah. Perfect timing. Rick jogged over, his enthusiasm nauseating as always. We've got the system exactly like you designed. Want to do the honors and test the first runoff? I examined my handiwork, the tarp system I'd engineered to fail. The support brackets looked sturdy enough, positioned exactly where I'd calculated they'd receive maximum stress during Saturday's operation. A few strategic loosen bolts, and physics would do the rest. Looks good, I managed. Let's start with a small test batch. Rick poured a bucket of soapy water mixed with cooking oil across his prep surface. The liquid flowed perfectly along the tarp channels, collecting neatly in the bins exactly as designed. Tony hooped appreciatively. Brilliant system, Sarah. You might have missed your calling as an engineer. Sarah's got skills, Rick agreed, clapping me on the shoulder with genuine warmth. I keep telling her she should give meat another try. Someone this smart can't stay vegetarian forever. Vegan, I thought automatically, but didn't bother correcting him. By Sunday morning, Rick would have much bigger problems than my dietary preferences. Actually, Rick continued, I've been thinking about what you said at your barbecue. About environmental impact and all that. Maybe I should look into more sustainable practices after this competition. I nearly choked on my beer. Really? Yeah. Like, I could source local meat, reduce waste, maybe even try some of that plant-based stuff for guests who want it. You know, be more responsible. The sincerity in his voice hit me like a physical blow. This was Rick, the same man who'd humiliated me in front of my guests, talking about incorporating my values into his barbecue philosophy. That's great, Rick, I stammered. Plus, he continued, warming to the topic, Tony here was telling me about this charity program where competition winners donate extra food to homeless shelters. I'm thinking if I take first place Saturday, I could set up something like that for our neighborhood events. Tony nodded enthusiastically. Rick's got a good heart under all that bluster. He just needed someone to point him in the right direction. I excused myself to examine the far side of the containment system, fighting the urge to vomit. This was worse than the children's hospital guilt. Rick wasn't just the neighborhood barbecue king, he was apparently on the verge of becoming the neighborhood barbecue philanthropist. And I was about to destroy him for it. My phone rang. Mrs. Patterson. Sarah, dear, I hope I'm not interrupting. I wanted to thank you personally for helping Rick with his environmental compliance. It shows such maturity and community spirit. It's nothing, really. Oh, but it is something. After Saturday's success, I'm planning to nominate you for the Neighborhood Association Board. We need more people with your scientific background and collaborative attitude. The Neighborhood Association Board. They wanted to put me in charge of community relations while I was actively plotting to destroy their biggest fundraiser. Mrs. Patterson, I'm not sure I'm the right. Nonsense. Rick specifically recommended you. Said you were exactly the kind of neighbor Maple Street needed. After hanging up, I stood frozen in Rick's backyard, listening to him and Tony laugh over some barbecue joke, watching them work together with the easy camaraderie I'd been craving since moving here. This was supposed to be simple. Rick had humiliated me, so I'd humiliate him back. Clean, proportional revenge. But Rick recommending me for the neighborhood board? Planning to donate food to homeless shelters? Talking about incorporating sustainable practices? None of that fit the villain I constructed in my head. My phone buzzed again. A text from Jessica, so excited for Saturday. Rick told everyone how amazing your environmental system is. You're going to be the hero of the whole event. Glowing star. Hero. Right. I walked back to Rick and Tony, my sabotage tools feeling like lead weights in my pocket, and tried to smile as they showed me their perfectly functioning containment system, the system I was going to destroy in less than 48 hours. Friday morning hit me like a hangover, except I hadn't touched a drop of alcohol. I'd spent the night staring at my ceiling, replaying Rick's words about sustainable practices and homeless shelters until they became a cruel mantra. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mrs. Patterson's grateful smile, Jessica's excitement, Tony's admiration for my brilliant containment system. The system I was still planning to sabotage in 18 hours. I was nursing my fourth cup of coffee when my doorbell rang at 7 a.m. Through the peephole, I could see Rick holding what looked like a gift basket, his face bright with morning enthusiasm that made me want to crawl back into bed. Sarah. Hope I didn't wake you. I brought breakfast. He thrust the basket toward me as I opened the door. Fresh muffins from Miller's Bakery, that fancy coffee you like from downtown, and he pulled out a small wrapped package with obvious pride. A little thank you gift. Rick, you didn't have to. Open it. I think you'll get a kick out of this. Inside the wrapping was a t-shirt. Not one of Rick's usual offensive slogans, but a simple design that read Barbecue Consultant in elegant script, with a small leaf pattern around the border. I had it custom made, Rick explained, practically bouncing on his toes. Figured you deserved official recognition for saving my competition. The leaf design was Tony's idea, you know, for your environmental expertise. I held the shirt, feeling the soft fabric between my fingers, and something inside my chest cracked wide open. It's really thoughtful, Rick. Plus, I was hoping you'd wear it tomorrow. You know, let everyone see that you're part of the team. His expression grew slightly serious. Sarah, I know I was a complete ass at your barbecue. I've been thinking about it all week, and there's no excuse for what I said. Your food was actually pretty good, I was just being a stubborn old carnivore. The apology I'd been waiting for, delivered with genuine remorse, 18 hours before I destroyed his life. Anyway, Rick continued, I wanted you to know that having you on the judging panel tomorrow means a lot to me. Shows the whole neighborhood that we're past all that stupid food drama. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table holding the t-shirt and staring at my sabotage tools laid out like surgical instruments. 2 loosened bolts. That's all it would take. 2 tiny pieces of metal, and Rick's containment system would fail spectacularly during the most important barbecue competition of his life. My phone rang. David Chen from the EPA. Sarah, I've been thinking about that grease dumping situation you asked about. If you're planning to report someone, you should know that enforcement has gotten really aggressive lately. They're making examples of people, especially in high-visibility cases. What do you mean, examples? Criminal prosecution instead of just fines. Jail time for repeat offenders. And they've started going after civil damages too, making violators pay for long-term environmental cleanup, habitat restoration, that sort of thing. We're talking potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars. Hundreds of thousands. My mouth went dry. David, what if this person was trying to reform? Like, making an effort to change their practices? Doesn't matter once you're in the enforcement pipeline. The law's the law, and the optics are terrible if they let someone slide just because they promised to do better. He paused. Sarah, whoever you're thinking of reporting, are you sure they deserve that kind of life-altering consequence? Life-altering consequence. For 2 loosened bolts and a moment of petty revenge. After hanging up, I walked out to my deck and stared across at Rick's house. He was in his backyard, meticulously checking every aspect of his setup one final time, his movements careful and precise. Through his kitchen window, I could see what looked like competition paperwork spread across his dining table. My phone buzzed with a group text to the judging panel, judges. Final reminder that we start at noon tomorrow. Thanks especially to Sarah for making this competition possible with her environmental expertise. Rick's system is going to set the standard for responsible barbecuing. Can't wait to see everyone. Jessica. Set the standard for responsible barbecuing. Based on my sabotage design that would fail in front of 40 witnesses and at least 1 enforcement officer, potentially sending Rick to prison and bankrupting him in the process. All because he'd mocked my plant-based burgers at a backyard barbecue. I looked down at the custom t-shirt in my hands, at the careful leaf pattern Tony had suggested, at Rick's genuine attempt to make amends. Then I looked at my sabotage tools, still waiting on the kitchen table like a loaded gun. 18 hours until the competition. 18 hours to decide whether I was seeking justice or just destroying a man who was trying to become better. My phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. Is this Sarah Martinez? This is Dr. Rebecca Walsh from Mercy Children's Hospital. I understand you're helping coordinate tomorrow's barbecue fundraiser? Yes, I managed, gripping the phone tighter. I'm helping with the environmental compliance. Wonderful. I'm calling to personally thank you. Rick Morrison mentioned that without your expertise, this year's competition might not have been possible due to new regulations. My stomach plummeted. He said that? Oh yes. He was quite emphatic about it when he called to discuss this year's donation setup. We're hoping to purchase a new pediatric ventilator with the funds. It's $12,000, but combined with last year's surplus, your fundraiser should put us right at our goal. A pediatric ventilator. For children who couldn't breathe on their own. Dr. Walsh, what happens if the fundraiser doesn't, if we don't raise the expected amount? Well, we'd have to wait until next year's drive, obviously. It's not ideal, we have several young patients who could really benefit from updated equipment, but we make do. Her voice carried the weary patience of someone accustomed to hoping for the best while planning for disappointment. But Rick assured me you've solved all the compliance issues, so I'm optimistic. After she hung up, I stood frozen in my kitchen, staring at the custom t-shirt that suddenly felt like evidence of a crime I hadn't yet committed. Through my window, I could see Rick in his backyard, now joined by Tony and what looked like 2 other men, all of them examining the containment system I designed. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from an unknown number. Ms. Martinez, this is Officer Janet Kim with City Environmental Enforcement. We'll be conducting routine inspections at tomorrow's community event. Thank you for ensuring compliance protocols are followed. Routine inspections. There would definitely be enforcement officers there, just as Tony had predicted. Officers who would witness whatever happened to Rick's containment system. I walked outside, drawn by some masochistic need to see my handiwork up close one final time. As I approached Rick's fence, I could hear the conversation in his backyard. Telling you, Sarah's system is bulletproof, Rick was saying. She thought of everything. Even accounted for thermal expansion on the tarp supports. Thermal expansion. I'd mentioned that during my design consultation, never imagining Rick would actually remember such technical details. Smart lady, one of the other men replied. You're lucky to have a neighbor willing to help after. After I was a complete jackass to her, Rick finished. Yeah, I know. Makes it even more incredible that she stepped up. Really makes you think about the kind of person you want to be, you know? I crept closer to the fence, hidden behind my neighbor's hedge. Speaking of which, Rick continued, I've been talking to Sarah about maybe doing a joint event next spring. Her vegan stuff, my traditional barbecue. Show the neighborhood that different food philosophies can coexist. Rick Morrison going soft on us? Tony laughed. Not soft. Just smarter, maybe. Sarah's got me thinking about sustainability, waste reduction, all that environmental stuff. Figure if I'm going to be the neighborhood barbecue guy, I should probably do it responsibly. I backed away from the fence, my chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to panic. This wasn't the Rick I'd constructed in my head, the stubborn, irredeemable neighbor who deserved whatever consequences I could engineer. This was someone actively trying to grow, to change, to incorporate the very values he'd once mocked. And tomorrow, if everything went according to my plan, I'd watch him lose everything in front of the entire community he was trying so hard to serve. My phone rang one final time. Mrs. Patterson again. Sarah, dear, I hope this isn't presumptuous, but I've already drafted the paperwork for your neighborhood association nomination. After tomorrow's success, I plan to call for an immediate vote. The neighborhood association. Where I'd help make decisions about community standards and environmental responsibility while harboring the secret that I'd sabotage their biggest fundraiser. 16 hours until the competition. 16 hours to decide who I really wanted to be. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that made everything feel ominous. I stood at my kitchen window at 6 a.m., watching Rick's backyard transform into competition central. He'd been up since dawn, moving with the focused energy of someone whose entire reputation hung in the balance. My sabotage tool sat on the counter beside my untouched coffee, two small wrenches that could change everything in 30 seconds. By 8 a.m., the steady drizzle had turned into proper rain. I watched Rick frantically covering his prep stations with additional tarps, his movements increasingly frantic as water pooled in unexpected places. The weather was doing what I'd planned to do, testing his containment system to its breaking point. My doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Jessica standing under an umbrella, her face tight with concern. "Sarah, thank God you're up. We have a problem." I opened the door, my stomach already sinking. "What kind of problem?" "The weather's making Rick's system unstable. He's freaking out about water weight on the tarps, and Tony thinks some of the support brackets might not hold if this keeps up." She stepped inside, shaking rainwater from her coat. "Rick asked if you could come take a look. He trusts your engineering more than anyone's right now." I stared at her, my mouth dry. The irony was perfect and horrible. Rick needed my help to prevent exactly what I'd been planning to cause. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that Mrs. Patterson's talking about postponing if the system fails. And you know what that means for the hospital fundraiser." Jessica grabbed my hands. "Sarah, you're the only one who understands how this system works. If anyone can save this competition, it's you." 20 minutes later, I stood in Rick's backyard wearing a rain jacket and carrying my toolkit, watching him pace like a caged animal while Tony pointed out stress points in the containment system. "The brackets here and here," Tony was saying, indicating the exact spots where I'd loosened the bolts. "They're showing micro-movement already, and we haven't even started cooking yet." Rick turned to me with desperate eyes. "Sarah, please tell me you can fix this. I can't let the hospital down." I approached the brackets I'd sabotaged, my hands trembling as I examined my handiwork. The loosened bolts were exactly where I'd left them, hidden among dozens of other connection points. All I had to do was stay quiet, let physics take its course, and watch Rick's world collapse in 6 hours. Instead, I heard myself saying, "I see the problem. These connections need reinforcement." "Can you do it?" Rick asked. I pulled out my wrench and began tightening the bolts I'd loosened just days before. "Yeah. I can fix it." As I worked, steadying the system I designed to fail, Rick stood beside me holding an umbrella over my tools. "Sarah," he said quietly, "whatever happens today, I want you to know how grateful I am. Not just for this, for everything. You could have let me crash and burn after how I treated you, but you didn't. That means something." I tightened the final bolt, my hand steady now despite the rain. "We're neighbors, Rick. That's what neighbors do." But even as I said it, watching Rick's relieved smile, I knew this wasn't over. I'd made one choice, but the real test was still hours away. Because I hadn't just loosened those two bolts. There was still the drainage valve I'd tampered with, hidden beneath the main collection tank. The one that would start leaking grease directly toward the storm drain exactly 4 hours into the competition. Right when the enforcement officer would be conducting her inspection. The competition was in full swing by noon, with neighbors streaming into Rick's backyard despite the lingering drizzle. I stood at the judge's table wearing my custom barbecue consultant t-shirt, watching Rick work his massive smoker with the precision of a surgeon. Every few minutes, he'd glance over at his containment system, the system I'd fixed that morning, and give me a grateful thumbs up. But beneath the main collection tank, my hidden sabotage was still waiting. I checked my phone. 12:47 p.m. The drainage valve would start its slow leak in approximately 2 hours and 13 minutes, right as Officer Kim began her environmental inspection. Right as the crowd reached its peak for the afternoon judging. "Sarah, you're looking a little pale," Mrs. Patterson observed, appearing at my elbow with a clipboard. "Everything all right, dear?" "Just concentrating on the judging criteria," I lied, watching Rick baste his massive pork shoulder. The smell was incredible, even to my vegan sensibilities, rich and smoky and exactly the kind of thing that would have tempted me 6 months ago. "Well, try to enjoy yourself too. This is such a wonderful day for the community." Mrs. Patterson beamed at the crowd gathering around the various cooking stations. "Rick mentioned you two are planning a joint event in the spring? Vegan and traditional barbecue together? The spring event." Another thing Rick had shared with the neighborhood association president, another future plan that would evaporate when the enforcement officers arrived in 2 hours. "We're still in the early planning stages," I managed. "Brilliant idea, though. Shows real leadership and collaboration." Mrs. Patterson made a note on her clipboard. "All the more reason I'm confident about your board nomination. The vote will probably happen at next week's meeting." My phone buzzed with a text from Officer Kim. "Will be arriving at approximately 3 p.m. for routine environmental compliance check. Please ensure all disposal systems are clearly marked for inspection." 3 p.m. Exactly when my sabotaged valve would be in full failure mode, creating a steady stream of grease flowing directly into the storm drain. I calculated the timing perfectly, maximum damage at maximum visibility. "Sarah." Rick's voice boomed across the yard. "Come settle a debate. Tony thinks my rub penetrated too deep, but I say it's perfect." I walked over on unsteady legs, trying to focus on the conversation while my phone buzzed with updates. Dr. Walsh from the Children's Hospital had arrived and was taking photos for their newsletter. Local news had sent a photographer. The crowd was approaching 40 people, just as Rick had predicted. All of them about to witness his spectacular downfall. "What do you think?" Rick asked, cutting a small sample of the pork. "Too much bark on the outside?" The meat looked perfect, dark, glistening crust giving way to pink, tender interior. Even knowing what was coming, I had to admit Rick had outdone himself. "It's beautiful work," I said honestly. "Hear that, Tony?" Sarah knows what she's talking about. Rick's pride was infectious, drawing admiring looks from nearby competitors. 5 years running, baby. This one's for the kids at the hospital." My chest tightened. 1:15 p.m. Less than 2 hours until the valve failed. I excused myself to check on the other competitors, but really I needed air that didn't smell like Rick's success. As I walked the perimeter of his yard, I passed the collection tank where my hidden sabotage waited. The valve looked innocuous, just another connection in a complex system. But in 90 minutes, it would destroy everything Rick had worked for, everything he was trying to become. My phone rang. "Jessica." "Sarah, where are you?" The photographer wants a picture of all the judges, plus Rick specifically requested you be in the shot with his smoker setup. A photo. For posterity. Me standing next to the system I'd sabotaged, smiling while Rick's future ticked away beneath our feet. I'll be right there, I said, and started walking back toward the crowd, each step feeling like a countdown. The photo session was torture. I stood beside Rick's pristine smoker setup, forcing smiles while the local news photographer captured what would probably become evidence in an environmental crime case. Rick's arm around my shoulders felt like a lead weight, his genuine warmth radiating through the custom t-shirt he'd made for me. Make sure you get Sarah in the shot, Rick told the photographer. None of this would be possible without her expertise. Click. Flash. Another image of me grinning beside the system I was about to destroy. By 2:30 p.m., my nerves were fraying beyond repair. The valve failure was 30 minutes away, and Officer Kim had just texted that she was running early, expected arrival 2:45 p.m. instead of 3 o'clock. My sabotage timing was about to become perfect in the worst possible way. I was pacing near the judge's table when I overheard a conversation that stopped me cold. Really think Rick's changed, Mrs. Henderson was saying to her husband. Did you hear he's donating all his leftover meat to the food bank tomorrow? And he asked Sarah to help him research sustainable sourcing for next year's competition. Good for him, Mr. Henderson replied. Man's been the backbone of this neighborhood for years, but he needed someone like Sarah to point him in the right direction. Someone like Sarah. Right. Someone who was about to point him straight into criminal prosecution. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Ms. Martinez, this is Amy Chen from Channel 7 News. We understand you engineer the environmental compliance system for today's fundraiser. Would you be available for a brief on-camera interview about sustainable community events? Television coverage. They wanted to interview me about my innovative waste management system right as it catastrophically failed on live TV. The irony would have been hilarious if it weren't about to destroy multiple lives. I was staring at my phone in horror when Tony appeared beside me, his expression concerned. Sarah, you look like you're about to be sick. Everything okay with the system? The system's fine, I managed, which was technically true for another 12 minutes. Good, because Rick's been bragging to everyone about your engineering. Says you're the smartest person he's ever met. Tony's admiration felt like a knife twist. Man's got it bad for proving he can change. Been reading environmental impact studies all week, talking about carbon footprint reduction, the whole 9 yards. 2:35 p.m. 10 minutes. I watched Rick work his grill, his movements confident and precise, occasionally glancing at his containment system with the satisfied air of someone whose problems were solved. Several neighborhood kids had gathered around his setup, fascinated by the massive smoker and his patient explanations of barbecue technique. Mr. Rick, I heard one little girl ask, why is there all that stuff under your cooking table? Rick beamed. That's my environmental protection system. My friend Sarah designed it to keep all the messy stuff from hurting the water where fish live. The little girl nodded solemnly. My mom says we have to protect fish. Your mom's absolutely right, Rick said, ruffling her hair. That's why smart people like Sarah help guys like me learn better ways to do things. 2:40 p.m. 5 minutes until Officer Kim arrived. 5 minutes until the valve I'd sabotaged started its slow leak that would build to a catastrophic failure right in front of those kids, right in front of the news cameras, right in front of everyone who'd started believing Rick Morrison could actually change. I pulled out my phone and started typing a text to Officer Kim. Sorry, need to reschedule inspection due to equipment issues. Then I stopped. My finger hovered over the send button as I watched Rick kneel down to explain barbecue basics to 3 fascinated children, his voice gentle and patient, nothing like the arrogant neighbor who'd humiliated me 2 weeks ago. 2:42 p.m. 3 minutes to decide who I really was. I deleted the text to Officer Kim and ran toward Rick's setup, my heart pounding as I pushed through the crowd of neighbors and children. Rick. I called out, dropping to my knees beside the collection tank. I need to check something, emergency maintenance. He looked confused but stepped back as I frantically searched for the valve I'd sabotaged. My hand shook as I located it beneath the tank, already showing the first signs of the leak I'd engineered. A thin stream of grease was beginning to seep toward the storm drain. Sarah, what's wrong? Rick asked, genuine concern in his voice. I grabbed my wrench and began tightening the valve I deliberately loosened, my movements desperate now. Just a precaution, I lied, cranking the connection until the leak stopped completely. Wanted to make sure everything was secure before the inspection. As I worked, I caught sight of Officer Kim's marked vehicle pulling up to the curb. She was here, clipboard in hand, ready to conduct the environmental assessment that would have destroyed Rick if I'd let my sabotage play out. There, I said, sitting back on my heels. System's completely secure now. Rick stared down at me, something shifting in his expression. Sarah, that valve was fine this morning when we tested everything. My blood ran cold. He'd noticed. Sometimes fittings loosen under pressure, I said weakly. No, Rick said slowly, his voice quiet enough that only I could hear. That valve was deliberately loosened. Someone who understood the system well enough to know exactly which connection would cause maximum damage. We stared at each other in silence while the competition continued around us. The truth hung between us like a live wire. Rick knew what I'd done, and more importantly, what I'd just undone. Why? He asked finally. I looked around at the neighborhood kids still fascinated by his smoker, at Mrs. Patterson proudly showing off the fundraiser totals to Dr. Walsh, at Jessica beaming as she coordinated the judges. At 40 people who'd come together for something bigger than themselves. Because I remembered what neighbors actually do for each other, I said. Rick was quiet for a long moment, then extended his hand to help me up. For what it's worth, he said, I deserved whatever you were planning. What I did at your barbecue was unforgivable. Yeah, I agreed, accepting his hand. It really was. He laughed, surprised and genuine. Fair enough. So where do we go from here? Before I could answer, Officer Kim approached with her clipboard. Ms. Martinez? I'm here for the environmental compliance inspection. Right on schedule, I said, my voice steadier now. Rick, why don't you walk Officer Kim through your containment system? I think she'll be impressed with how thoroughly you've addressed waste management. As Rick led the inspection tour, pointing out features and safety measures with obvious pride, I stood back and watched the competition continue around me. The fundraiser would succeed. The children's hospital would get their equipment. Rick would win his 5th championship and continue becoming the neighbor he was trying to be. And I'd learned the difference between justice and revenge. My phone buzzed with a text from Rick. Thank you for saving me from myself. And thank you for saving me from you. Partners for that spring barbecue event? I looked across the yard at him, already surrounded by neighbors celebrating another successful competition, then typed back, partners. But I'm bringing the good vegan stuff this time. His laughter carried across the entire backyard, warm and genuine and free of the mockery that had started this whole mess. It was the sound of a neighborhood finally learning to grow together. Sometimes the best revenge is letting someone become better than the person who hurt you.